I had planned everything down to the last detail. Just a quiet family dinner. Nothing extravagant, but thoughtful. I made Jason's mother's favorite roast, polished the silverware, even lit the good candles we'd been saving. I slipped into the navy blue dress he once said made me look like poetry. All I wanted was a peaceful night. Something simple. Something safe. But from the moment Claire walked in, I felt the shift. Her heels clicked too loud on the hardwood, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. Claire had this way of wrapping insults in compliments, like wrapping barbed wire in silk. One glass of wine turned into 3, and soon her tone wasn't so sweet anymore. The digs got sharper. Her eyes started locking on mine a little too long. Then came the blow. She raised her glass, leaned back like she owned the night, and said, "Honestly, I think my brother should have gone back to his ex. She was way better than you." For a moment, the whole room went still. You could hear the clink of a fork hitting a plate. I looked at Jason, my husband, my partner, waiting for him to say something, anything. But he didn't. He didn't flinch, didn't defend me, just stared at his plate like her words hadn't shattered something between us. And that silence, God, that silence. It said more than if he'd shouted. It told me I was alone at that table, even with people all around. I felt my stomach tighten, my throat dry up. I kept blinking, hoping it would stop the sting behind my eyes. I forced a smile, the kind that hurts your face because it's holding back 100 other emotions. No one said a word. Not his mother. Not his father. Not Jason. Claire just smirked and took another sip like she'd won something. I wanted to scream, to stand up and throw my napkin at her smug face. But instead, I sat there, pretending I still had an appetite, pretending I was fine. The rest of the night moved in slow motion. Laughter returned, but I wasn't part of it. I kept nodding at conversations I couldn't hear, chewing food I couldn't taste. I kept glancing at Jason, hoping he'd turn to me with a look, just a look that said, "I'm sorry, I should have spoken up." But nothing came. And that's when I felt it, something small and invisible inside me, starting to crack. By the time the last dish was cleared, I was barely holding myself together. My hands were shaking under the table, but I kept them folded neatly on my lap. I could hear the clink of wine glasses, the hum of casual conversation, and yet, I felt completely invisible. No one noticed the storm behind my smile, or maybe they did, and looked away. When we finally got home, Jason slipped off his shoes and walked to the kitchen like nothing had happened. No mention of Claire, no apology, no attempt to see how I was feeling. I stood by the door, still in that dress, still waiting. And when I realized he wasn't going to say anything, a part of me stopped waiting, for good. That night, I lay in bed beside him, facing the wall. I listened to his breathing, steady and unbothered, while my mind raced in 100 directions. I kept replaying the moment she spoke, but more than her words, it was his silence that echoed, louder than any insult. He didn't have to say he agreed. His silence already had. And that silence, it would follow me into morning. The morning light didn't feel gentle. It felt like a spotlight on everything I didn't want to face. I stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee with hands that still felt cold from the night before. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say over and over, not to fight, not to accuse, just to understand. I needed to know that he cared, that last night wasn't as final as it felt. When Jason walked in, I gave him a small smile, hoping he'd take it as an invitation to try, to fix it. But he just mumbled a tired morning and grabbed his mug. No eye contact, no warmth. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk about last night?" I asked. My heart was in my hands, and I was offering it to him, just one more chance to hold it gently. He didn't even pause. Just leaned against the counter, eyes fixed on the floor, and said, "She made me feel things you never could." And just like that, the air left the room. My knees didn't buckle, my hands didn't shake. But inside, it felt like something sacred had been quietly buried, not with a scream, not with a slam, just 6 words that folded our entire life in half. I didn't cry. I didn't ask what he meant. Because in that moment, I realized something. I'd been asking for crumbs from a table where I was never truly fed, and now I wasn't hungry anymore. There was a calm that came over me. Strange, considering how much I used to fear this exact moment. But now that it was here, it didn't feel loud. It felt final. I went upstairs, pulled out my suitcase, and began folding the pieces of my life into it. Not out of anger, not to make a scene, but because I knew I deserved more than staying in a place where love had turned into comparison. I touched the framed photo on the dresser, our wedding day. I used to believe that day meant something unbreakable, but sometimes the cracks start long before the walls fall. He didn't stop me. He didn't ask me to stay. Just sat on the edge of the bed, watching, like I was packing for a weekend trip. I kept waiting for him to say, "Don't go." But maybe he'd already left in his own way, long before I ever picked up that suitcase. And that's the part that hurt the most, not the leaving, but realizing I had stayed so long after he was already gone. I zipped the suitcase slowly, like sealing the last page of a story I never thought would end this way. No shouting, no grand scene, just the sound of the zipper and the weight of goodbye hanging in the air. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to explain. Sometimes silence is the loudest thing we can say. And mine was filled with every word he never spoke. Walking out the front door, I felt the sun on my face, and for the first time in a long time, I let it touch me. Really touch me. The house behind me was quiet, still holding pieces of me in its walls, its routines, its mornings. But I didn't look back, not once, because I knew, if I did, I might hesitate, and I couldn't afford to hesitate anymore. I didn't know where I was going, not exactly. But I knew I was walking towards something that felt more like truth. Maybe even peace. All I had was a suitcase, my breath, and the fragile beginnings of courage. But that was enough for now. Enough to take the first step. And something deep inside me whispered, maybe, just maybe, this was the real beginning. For a few weeks, I stayed at my friend Lena's place. Just a pull-out couch and a closet barely big enough for my suitcase. But it felt safe. Every night, we drank tea and talked like we were teenagers again. She didn't ask too many questions. She just let me be quiet when I needed or laugh when I could. I didn't know how to heal yet, but I was learning how to breathe again. Eventually, I found a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, just a cozy space with creaky floors and sunlight that poured through the windows like a hug. I bought a secondhand couch, a coffee table that wobbled, and a plant I wasn't sure I'd keep alive. It didn't feel like home yet, but it felt like mine. Every little corner was a fresh page waiting to be written. I started going to therapy once a week. At first, I didn't even know what to say. But slowly, the words came. I talked about how I'd shrunk myself in that marriage, how I stopped hearing my own voice, how I forgot what I even liked, what made me feel alive. And little by little, I began piecing myself back together. Not the woman I used to be, but someone stronger, someone new. I started walking every morning. Not for exercise, not at first, but to remember what it felt like to move forward. There was something healing about the sound of my steps on the pavement, the rhythm of it. I'd pass by coffee shops, bookstores, strangers with dogs. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just letting life happen without asking it to prove anything to me. One rainy afternoon, I ducked into this little cafe on the corner I'd never noticed before. I ordered a cappuccino, found a seat by the window, and pulled out a book I hadn't touched in years. That's when I heard a voice, familiar, warm, and just a little surprised. "Amara?" I looked up, and there he was, Leo, from high school, the boy who used to walk me home in the 10th grade. He looked older, sure, but still had that same crooked smile and spark in his eyes. We hugged, awkward but sweet, and then just talked. About nothing and everything. About how much had changed and how much hadn't. It wasn't magical or cinematic. It was just easy. And after so much heaviness, I didn't realize how much I missed easy. We stayed in that cafe until the sky turned dark and the streetlights blinked on. I hadn't laughed like that in a long time. Really laughed. Not the polite kind you force at dinner parties, but the kind that catches you off guard and makes your chest feel lighter. Leo listened in a way that made me feel like I mattered. Like I wasn't just a woman with a past, but someone worth knowing now. He didn't ask about Jason, didn't pry. He just wanted to know what kind of books I liked, what made me feel calm, where I saw myself next. It was strange and beautiful, being seen without being picked apart. As we said goodbye, he asked if I wanted to meet again sometime. I said yes, not because I was ready for anything big, but because I was curious what might come next. Walking home that night, the rain had stopped, but everything shimmered like it still remembered. I looked up at the sky and smiled, softly, cautiously. Maybe I wasn't meant to go back to the life I had. Maybe I was meant to build something entirely different, something lighter, something truer, and something inside me whispered, "This isn't a detour, it's the real road." Time moved gently after that. No big fireworks, no whirlwind romance, just small, meaningful moments that stitched something new into my life. Leo and I started seeing each other more often. Coffee turned into walks, then dinner, then lazy Sundays filled with music and soft laughter. He never rushed me, never made me feel like I owed him healing. He simply showed up, again and again. There was something different about the way he loved, or maybe just the way he saw me. He didn't compare me to anyone. He didn't hold me to a version of myself I'd outgrown. With Leo, I didn't feel like I had to earn love by being quieter, smaller, easier to handle. I could breathe fully, laugh without flinching, say what I meant without weighing every word first. One afternoon, I caught myself humming in the kitchen, barefoot, hair a mess, sauce on my shirt, and I froze. Not because anything was wrong, but because I realized how long it had been since I felt this kind of calm, this softness. No tension hiding under the surface, no walking on eggshells, just love that felt like home, not a test. And for the first time, I knew this was real. There were no games with Leo, no mixed signals, no guessing. If he said he'd call, he did. If he saw I was tired, he didn't take it personally. He just held space. I didn't realize how much I had unlearned softness, how long I'd lived in defense mode. With him, my guard slowly lowered. Not all at once, but layer by layer. And each time he met me with grace. Sometimes we'd sit on the couch in complete silence, legs tangled under a blanket, just existing. No need to fill the space with noise. That silence, unlike the one I knew before, wasn't cold or empty. It was warm, safe, like being wrapped in trust. I never had to earn his attention or prove I was enough. I just was. And that was everything. One night, while we were watching some silly movie, I laughed so hard I had to wipe my eyes. And Leo looked at me, not in awe, not in possession, but with this gentle recognition, like he saw all of me and didn't flinch. I looked back and thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not fear, not confusion, just love. Honest, steady, healing love. One morning I stood by the window watching the lights spill across the floor, and I whispered something to myself. This doesn't hurt. And it was such a simple truth, but such a foreign one. I used to think love had to come with pain. That tension and drama were just part of the package. But now I understood. Real love isn't chaos. It's peace. With Leo, I didn't feel like I was performing. I wasn't chasing approval or trying to stay lovable. I was just me, with my scars, my quiet, my joy. And he didn't flinch. He stayed. He celebrated the little things I used to downplay. And slowly, I started seeing myself through his eyes. Not as someone broken, but as someone becoming whole. I remember telling Lena one day, sometimes rejection isn't punishment, it's protection. She smiled like she already knew. And maybe I had to lose the version of love I thought I needed, to find the one I actually deserved. The kind that doesn't dim your light, the kind that feels like breathing again. And even though the past still whispered, it no longer had power over me. It started with a message from a mutual friend. Hey, saw you and Leo on Instagram. You look incredible. I smiled politely, but inside I knew what was coming. Word travels fast, especially when you're finally happy and the people who once made you feel small start noticing. I didn't post often, but the photo Lena shared said it all. Me and Leo holding hands, mid-laugh, free. Not long after, I saw Claire's name pop up in my notifications. She'd liked the photo, no comment, just a like. Subtle, calculated. But I knew her well enough to recognize the silence behind it. And then came Jason. The text hit my phone like a ghost tapping at the door. I miss you. I think I made a mistake. I stared at the screen for a long time. Longer than I should have. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't satisfaction either. It was peace. Because once upon a time, that message would have undone me. I would have read it 10 times, searching for meaning, for a reason to believe he'd changed. But now I knew better. I didn't owe him my pain, or my attention. And in that moment, I realized my silence would be my loudest answer. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some stories don't deserve sequels, just a clean ending. And mine had already been written in full color, far away from the gray of our past. I deleted the message, not with bitterness, but with finality. The kind that comes from knowing you're no longer the same woman who once begged for crumbs and called it love. Leo was in the other room, humming as he watered the plants. He had no idea what had just happened, and I didn't feel the need to tell him. He didn't need to know about Jason's message to prove what we had was real. That was the difference. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to him, not to anyone. Peace doesn't ask for validation. It just is. Later that evening, we took a walk, fingers laced together like they belonged that way. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about little things, the smell of the bakery we passed, the funny dog across the street, what kind of soup we'd make tomorrow. And it was in those little moments that I felt the quiet kind of joy, the kind that doesn't need an audience to matter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Leo and I sat on a bench overlooking the water. The sky was painted in golds and deep blues, the kind of beauty that made you forget everything else. I leaned my head on his shoulder, not because I needed comfort, but because I wanted to share the stillness with him. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving love. I was living it. I thought of Jason again, just for a second. Not with longing or anger, but with a kind of gentle distance. He would always be part of my story, but not the ending. He was the chapter I had to walk through to become the woman I was now. And that woman, she was whole. She was soft without being fragile. And she no longer needed anyone's permission to feel radiant. As we watched the last bit of sun vanish behind the trees, I smiled to myself. Not a big showy grin, just something small and certain. He had tried to come back. They always do when they see what they've lost. But I didn't need to slam a door to make a point. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to walk away and become everything they said I wasn't.